Welcome back to the Real Estate Locker Room Show, folks. I'm your host, John Carney, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to tune in. To all of you return listeners out there that keep downloading the show week after week, I am truly grateful. Your support is what makes this podcast possible. I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate it. And thank you for choosing to share some of your time with us on the Real Estate Locker Room Show. If this is your first time tuning in, I want to say welcome and thank you. You know, the goal here is to deliver actionable advice on how you can elevate your real estate investing game today. We have great guests. We've got a great guest lined up today, but it's about the advice that you can apply today. And whether you're an industry expert or you're wherever you are in your investment journey, I'm sure you're going to learn something here on the show that believes that real estate is a team sport. So today we are approaching episode 100, which is super cool. We're not quite there yet. We're at episode 98 with my special guest, Cherie Latha, coming at me from the West Coast. Welcome to the show, Cherie.
Thank you so much, John, for having me. Happy to be here and talk more.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. So, you know, the premise of this show when I started it a couple years ago was really about exploring an intersection that I'm fascinated with. And that is the intersection between, you know, competitive sports in the ultra competitive business of real estate. And today, you know, we're in July already of the crazy year 2020. Financing is a problem. So that makes it more challenging. And there seems to be more money floating around in the private sector than there are deals. So I want to hear about your success story and what you're doing to keep building your great business.
Sure. Would you like me to start from where I'm today backwards or?
You know what? You have a success story. And I think that, success leaves clues. I didn't create that phrase, but I love it.
That's
and,
right.
you know, so why don't you start at the beginning, like start at what drew you to real estate? And you're a multifamily investor.
That's right.
You're in the San Francisco market, which most people would look at and say, whoa, that's too expensive for me, but you've been successful and we want to hear all about that.
Yeah, sure. So I do agree with you that, you know, real estate, for me, the fascination with real estate did start pretty young. You know, I remember driving my car and my mom looking at a vacant lot and asking us, you know, I wonder, you know, what that would cost. So, you know, it started out pretty young that there was a fascination towards it, but I didn't really do much with it until I was working in my career. I worked as a data scientist for FICO, the credit scoring company, where I was building the credit score for multiple banks and lending institutions all around the world. So that was my day job, and I was saving money on the side. And around 2010, my husband actually got quite sick. He was diagnosed with a disease called rheumatoid arthritis, which is a type of autoimmune disease. And we quickly figured out that we might actually end up losing his income if he were to get disabled from this disease. Thankfully, over the next year or so, he actually recovered. He made like a 90% recovery. We were really grateful and really happy that happened. But it still put that seed in our minds and planted that seed in our minds that we need to work towards financial freedom. And it made us take some pretty bold steps over the next few years in terms of acquiring real estate. My first deal was a deal out of state, actually. I bought a 12-unit apartment in Texas, in Dallas. And I turned that around in a year and a half, meaning it was 12 units. Every time the lease came due, I would, not renew it, go in there, renovate those units, and put it back on the market for a new higher rent. I did that for all 12 units in every time the lease expired. In a year and a half, they were all new, brand new. And I turned around and sold it in a year and a half, and I doubled the money I put into it.
That's a fantastic initial victory.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have those. And then the seed is planted, or you get the bug. You're like, I got to keep doing this. And how do I scale it? How do I make this my career? Like, how quickly was it that you ran into some obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, there were, of course, obstacles even on the first deal. So yeah, I mean, this is my Cliff Notes, happy ending version. But yeah, there were definitely obstacles. For example, for getting financing on the first deal is always quite hard when you're trying to buy 12 units. It's in the US, if it's 4 and under, it's a residential loan. So you as an individual, if you have a job or if you have a business, you can qualify just like you qualify to buy a house. You can qualify to buy a multifamily property. But the moment you hit 5 and above, the criteria for what they look for tends to be higher. Your first deal, your down payment tends to be higher. So I did end up having to put almost 30 to 35% down on that first deal. So that was a big learning, but it also set me up for success because now I had a track record. But if on the other hand, if I had played small, it would have taken me many years to get to 12 units. So in some ways, I'm glad I took that leap and went big instead of playing small, kind of in California.
So you went out of Texas, and did you get right back into California?
Yes, yeah, so that's exactly what happened. So once I was able to bring a substantial amount of money back, so I came back with about $700,000 back into California, and I could buy a property for close to $2.9 million with that amount of money. And that bought me less number of units. I only bought 14 units, but at least it positioned me to buy a larger apartment complex here in California. And that was very similar. I followed the same rinse and repeat. I was able to turn those units around. This was before all of California was rent controlled. So as we speak, 2020, all of California is rent controlled, but back when I bought it, it was not. So I was able to turn all of those units around, renovate them, and I got I think about $700 in bump up in each of those units after renovation. So that was quite a sizable bump, and that property appraised for about 4 million once that was complete.
Well, that is significant. Well, I've got a couple questions.
Sure.
I know a lot of people from California
Mhm.
that invest outside of California.
Okay.
And obviously, there are people that invest in California, and you're one of them. But it scares a lot of people. Not everybody, but I mean, there are people that say, "Hey, it's in the hard pile. The taxes, the laws, it's just too crazy. I want something slightly easier. I'm going to go to Phoenix or
Yeah.
Texas or wherever it might be." So,
Right.
I mean, are there some myths that you find are simply not true about being an investor in California? And just specifically, talk about the markets you're in. I mean, I know you're from the San Francisco area.
Yeah.
I'm not a geographical genius when it comes to northern NoCal. Just know it's up north and it's got a big international airport. So what's the secret that you uncovered here?
Yeah, so I mean, like most markets, it really is about understanding the local market and what works there. I think even when I brought my money back from Texas to California, I was not fully aware of everything that could work in California. But as I started to look at deals and got into contract even on deals is when it really became clear to me what that picture actually looked like. So for example, I got into contract on a property that required $120,000 of work, foundation work. Nobody wanted to touch that property. It was only $600,000 purchase price, but it had $120,000 in foundation work, and nobody wanted to buy it. But it was in San Francisco. I mean, it was in Oakland, and it was right next to public transportation. And it was a great location. So, but nobody wanted it. At that point, I got into contract on it, and I found that I couldn't find a bank that would finance it. But what it led me to was private money. And the moment I figured out there's something called hard money lending, which is essentially also called private money, which is a group of individuals who charge a really high interest rate, almost 9 to 12 to 14% interest rates on these loans. But they'll give you a loan for purchase, they'll give you a loan for renovation, and they'll give you a loan for any kind of work like foundation or what I call tenant buyouts as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. But my main 3 strategies have really been cash for keys, ADUs, and we'll talk about each of these, and layout changes. So those are my three big strategies that work in California. And combine that with the hard money that I just talked about, the private money, is how 90% of the investors that make a lot of money here in California are leveraging those. And we can jump into each of these if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I mean, for the audience, in smaller transaction deals, and I don't even know how to define that, but there just comes a point, not quite sure where that is, where hard money just translates into private equity or gap financing or mezzanine loans. So I mean, it's used by developers in multifamily and other commercial investors at a higher level. Obviously, the higher the level,
not anymore though. Like in San Francisco, for example, hard money is available to the average investor. You even for the first time investor, it is available to you. You just have to know that it exists, and you have to go to them and get pre-approved and show them your deal underwriting. And it's very, very accessible now. And I think it's probably a newer development just over the last 8 to 10 years. It's not always been the case, but just over the last 6 to 8 years or so, it's really blossomed into being accessible for the average investor. Even all the house flippers that I know in this area also use private money, simply because they get a higher leverage and they get all the renovation costs covered. And there are risks involved, but you gotta, that's why I prefer hard money for multifamily and not really, I don't go into single family flipping for that.
All right, so I want to dig into your formula here, but just I just also want to get something clear in my mind. So did you keep deal number 2, the foundation deal, and refinance that out with like kind of permanent financing, or you sold it and then you had a larger pool of money and you're putting that into the next deal?
Correct. Yes, I did sell that property and rolled it into a bigger property.
Okay.
So I do recommend flipping at least twice before you actually do the BRRRR strategy, which we'll get into.
All right. Yeah, we want to end on BRRRR. So you've got 3 items that you're applying in California. Let's hit the highlights real fast.
Yeah. So the 3 that I mentioned were cash for keys. Essentially, what that is in highly rent controlled areas, like historically rent controlled areas like New York and San Francisco and parts of California, where for decades the certain cities have been rent controlled, where a 1-bedroom somebody might be paying $500 a month for a 1-bedroom that in today's market rent is probably worth about $2,500 a month. So they're paying thousands of dollars under what it is worth today. So cash for keys is essentially a mutually agreed upon agreement between you, the owner, and the tenant, that they will take a pre-agreed upon sum of money to give you the keys to the unit and vacate the unit. So historically, landlords have used this every time they come across like problem tenants or tenants that are they pay a certain amount of money that the tenant also agrees to that same sum of money. They sign on a document that says, I received the money in return for leaving the unit, and all of that good stuff. So that is what cash for keys really is. And in these historically rent control markets, the reason why it works is because these rents are so undervalued. When you buy them, you're buying these properties that are zero cash flow, right? They're negative cash flow. They're not making any money. It sounds horrible on paper, which is the standard narrative, right? Don't buy in California, it doesn't cash flow. You're not going to make any money. But once you purchase it, and then you actually negotiate or talk to your tenants about the possibility, and only if they're interested will they engage in that conversation. And there's a certain way you have to go about it per the city's rules. And once you reach an agreement and they vacate the unit, you then have the option to renovate that unit and add almost a couple of $1,000s to your income, which is a big bump up from what was previously possible in any other market, which is regulated by market forces. So that's one, that's cash for keys. The second thing is something called the ADU. ADU is essentially like a granny unit or an in-law unit that you typically put in the back of your house. At least that's how I think about it. That's how it started. Cities, especially dense, highly populated cities, have come up with this new law called the ADU laws, which allow homeowners to put these units in the back of their homes to increase housing in these dense markets. Now, the real kicker here is that they allowed these units to be put into multifamily as well. So not just homes, multifamily properties are also allowed to have these units. So if you bought a triplex, you can put in 2 more units and make it 5 units. It might cost you, say, $300,000 to build 2 units, but you can then turn around and sell them at 300 a piece. So you would add $600,000 of value, but you've only put in $300,000 in construction. So you're getting to keep an extra $300,000 in profit. So that's the second strategy, the ADU strategy. And the third thing is layout changes. And this also works in really strong, dense markets where space is at a premium. So a lot of my buildings, for example, I've converted studios to 1 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms, simply by using up the detached kitchen space. So if you look at older buildings, you walk into a unit, you see a kitchen kind of off on the side. You know, they used to have separate kitchens, but now everyone wants open floor plan and open kitchen. So what do? You get rid of that kitchen and you take some of that square footage, add some of your living space square footage, make it a bedroom. And now you have a studio that we converted to a 1 bedroom, or a 1 bedroom that you converted to a 2 bedroom. And as you know, most of your listeners already know, a 1 bedroom is going to get you a couple $100 more than a studio in these markets. And you surely, in whichever market you are, the 1 bedroom commands a premium over a studio. So that alone adds value to your property. So those are the 3 big strategies that I use in California.
Perfect. I just want to ask a question and then follow through with the BRRRR. So sure. You're now at a point where you have a property that you're going to own and hold, right?
Correct.
And then you're going to then continue with that buy and hold strategy. So about how many doors are you holding right now? How many properties is that?
Yeah, right now about 30. I sold a bunch last year. So I'm sitting on some capital and looking to buy at least 50 to 100 out of state. But yeah, right now I'm holding about 30.
Okay, perfect. And then do you manage those, or do you have someone on your team that manages that?
Yeah, I have property managers. I always have property managers managing my properties.
Yeah, it's a tough job, and good property managers. Well, I think they're the cream of the crop. They're hard to find. It takes time to find these folks, and when you get them, you got to hold on.
Yeah,
okay.
And I advocate, like especially as you buy more units, it really does become easier. And that's why I encourage selling the first few deals you do, buy a larger number of units, and then everything starts to get easier because you have economies of scale.
Here's another kind of common thread is the word I'm looking for amongst the guests I've interviewed that have gotten in this space, right? They've started with finding that first deal, doing a lot of hard work. Hopefully you had a paintbrush in your hand at some point, because I believe everybody needs to paint something or fix something with a deadline, meaning like my guys are going to come with a check tomorrow. I better get this done now. And that just inevitably provides a learning experience that you can't get analyzing underwriting deals and analyzing numbers and so on and so forth. So I mean, you find that invaluable in the whole trajectory to where you are now?
Yes and no. So I do agree with you that there's some amount of work that we need to do, but I tried from the beginning of my investment journey, I try to keep real estate investing as passive as possible. For example, like during COVID, when units became vacant, I jumped on it because I was not sure how long it's going to take me to release these units. And so I did the advertising and I made sure the property manager was on top of things and got it rented out in like less than 2 weeks. So yes, there are definitely things that you need to manage on your own in order to keep the ball rolling and keep everybody on time. But I am a big proponent of not fixing toilets and not fixing things by yourself, because at that point you've taken the focus away from, I feel like, growth. It's been always very important for me to focus on the investment side of things and not get caught up in tiles and appliances and such. So I put teams in place for that stuff, and yes, manage them. And sometimes, yes, you do have to get dirty and you got to do the work yourself. So yes, there's value in all of that good stuff, but not to get sidetracked by trying to do all of it all by yourself.
No, I do tend to agree. I think what you're talking about is separating yourself from the growth of the business versus the day-to-day operations. But
Correct.
It's good to have the experience of I think sustained growth, but and then you can rapidly grow as you have. Okay, so popular if you're in any type of online real estate forum right now is the BRRRR, which is BRRRR. So you want to talk a little bit about that strategy and how it's worked for you?
Yeah, sure. So the BRRRR has 4 R's in it, in case anyone was wondering, because for the longest time I had only 3 R's, and then I figured, oh, I'm actually missing an R. So it has 4 R's and a B before it. It stands for buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and repeat. So those are the 4 R's and the B that start. So essentially what it is you buy a property, you rehab it, meaning you renovate it in some way, shape, or form. You then rent it out at the new higher rents. And then you can do something called a cash out refinance, where now after you rent it out at the new market value, your property has gone up in value. And when you refinance it, some banks will give you what they call as a cash out refinance, where you're able to pull your equity out of your property. The last R is repeat. So when you pull that equity out, you get cash out of that refinance, and you take that cash and buy another property. And that's what the BRRRR stands for.
I want to focus on the repeat part. It means you take the cash out to buy another property because
Correct.
You're taking real estate driven equity and reinvesting it in real estate. It's
Correct.
not and that's awesome. And I mean,
Yeah.
that is kind of the formula and there's the acronym, but I mean, that is what has worked forever. And you'll find just about every scale of real estate investor applies that when the light bulb goes off. So what are you working on now? You said you're looking out of state. Are there markets right now, July 2020, that you're focused on? Do you have a team out of state? How do you go about recruiting the people you want to work with in other markets?
Yeah, so I am looking at out of state markets. I'm looking at Florida, New Mexico, and North Carolina. Essentially, those are the 3 markets that I'm looking at out of state. I'm looking to do actually buy an older hotel and convert it to multifamily. So that's my next strategy that I'm going after. And your question was essentially, how do you get started in out of state investing? For me, it's always been, first narrowing down at least to 2 to 3 markets, and then picking up the phone and actually talking to a bunch of brokers. The good thing about brokers is once you get into the flow of talking to them and understanding and conveying your criteria to them, it becomes pretty clear who's kind of the A player in there, who's on top of their game. And once what I figured out over the years is that once you kind of get into that operating space, then the people that they refer you to tend to also be operating at a higher standard and operating at a place where investors want to work with them. So my first broker is the one who, when I worked did my deal in Dallas, is the one who recommended the property manager. And the property manager is the one who had an in-house contractor. So some of these property managers have something called an in-house contractor where they already have a team in place that will go in and renovate all the units for you. So, which is why it's less my problem who the exact contractor is, but I have the property manager manage the contractor and the broker oversees the property manager. So everyone's kind of keeping a check on everyone else. And I keep a check on everyone as a whole. So it becomes much easier to manage out of state renovations when the structure flows through so seamlessly like that. And yes, you can't super closely monitor every single expense, but if you have underwritten the deal with enough of a upside in it, then a small, margin that the contractor might, take over is much less compared to the effort it takes to execute on this deal.
Well, it's a super smart approach to investing out of state. What I like about what you just said is like that to me is the actionable item. Anyone who tunes into this episode is going to be able to. Another one, right? We have your top three, hacks or items to look for in California market. But when you go into an out of state market or out of town market, it can even like be an hour away. I mean, you're talking about something that I just want to dive into because I love how you framed it, and you might not even know that. It's like, you find the right professional person, whether it's a broker, in this case, a broker, or, a lawyer, an accountant, a banker. They are going to, if they are playing at a high level and they've got integrity, they're going to be referring you to people that also are playing at their level or higher.
Correct.
Also have the same value system. So, I mean, I like being aligned in values with the people I work with. And one of my values is hard work. And so I've seen that time and time again, where things just work famously when there's like-mindedness in something as simple as returning a phone call promptly, or there's just clues out there. So, I mean, thanks for sharing that, because we talk about this all the time on the show is investing out of state. This is a team sport. How do you recruit the team? Because inevitably that's once you crack that code, you can really go anywhere, including internationally, in my opinion.
Right. And you do have to, when you invest out of state, you do have to travel to the location. So what I tend to do is I first get the property in contract. I fly to the location where it is, where the property is located. And then I just schedule a whole bunch of interviews to meet property managers. I just don't go with just one, but I schedule a bunch of property managers, contractors, and I just cram it all into a few days, meet all of them, and then and then use your gut ultimately, as well as from what you've learned from them, and look at their working style, work ethic, and then pick from there.
No, that's fantastic. Great actionable advice for the audience out there. In one way to to vet your team, whether it's local, an hour away, 2 hours away, 6 hours away. It's really the same formula. We need an acronym for that. Before you be 4 hours, Burr, you have to get the right team in place. Well, that's awesome. And I really appreciate you sharing, all of that. Great. Your story is great and very inspirational. Let me ask you a couple questions. We tend to kind of wind this down, and for consistency, I have just found that entrepreneurs like yourself generally have a few books lying around. Is there something you've read recently about entrepreneurship or that would help a real estate entrepreneur maybe connect some dots?
Yeah, so there's on the business side, I like this book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's a book that came out maybe 2018, 2019. I've recommended highly. It applies to any aspect of your life, but it really encourages you to break down anything into tiny, tiny habits. And I'm a big fan of that. The second real estate book that I recommend is a book called Adding Value to Real Estate by John T. Reed. He's a California-based investor, but when people think of rehab, they always have an idea of what rehab means, changing the carpets and tiles and all of that good stuff. But if you read John's book, you'll see that that he thinks so out of the box when it comes to adding value to real estate, that it'll put so many ideas in your head as to how you can be the pioneer of value add in your town, because he thinks of so many different things.
That it's pretty cool. There's a local investor that I really look up to. I mean, he's playing the multifamily game at the highest level. And I mean, his big thing is like lobbies, like the curbside appeal, and they'll take a building, and complete, and they'll pour significant attention and treasure into a complete exterior renovation. And what they're
Right.
able to do on the inside is the required updates, but the whole package comes together in massive upside. Did you read
Correct.
that before you decided to do the foundations? Just out of
I did read
curiosity.
that book, and yeah, I mean, I was always open to doing work if that meant I have an upside at the end of, or a pot of gold at the end. So yeah, he gave me the big idea for converting studios to one bedrooms. That came from the book, and how to manage rent controlled areas also came from the book. And yeah, there's plenty of stuff in there. There's so many things you can't even start trying to explain. But to your point, if you understand the market well enough and you understand the value of whether it be putting a washer dryer in a unit or whether it be doing a nice looking lobby, and you figure that out and figure out where you're going to get the best bang for your buck, then then that's all it really takes. But you got to think a little bit beyond what the average investor tends to do.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Definitely going on my long reading list. Is there a can you think back to a deal that was going sideways and you were able to overcome a challenge at the end and turn it around that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So one of the common, I guess, common mistakes, and a mistake that also, you don't recognize until it happens to you, is when you try to do too many projects at the same time. So in 2018, we had the opportunity to acquire a portfolio of smaller multifamily. So like 4 to 6 units, but a smaller group of multiple properties. And what happened was I found myself just spread too thin and unable to execute on any one of them really well. And the other the mistake I made was I gave all the projects to one contractor, because he gave me the best deal. He said, let me do these projects. I will deliver it on time. And I had worked with him before and I gave him the opportunity to do that, but he couldn't scale the way I was expecting to scale. So that is a problem you don't recognize until you're actually in it. I quickly, I turned it around in the sense that I sold off a couple, even without doing much work on some of them. As long as I could just break even, I sold off a couple, and I shrunk my portfolio to just the ones that were going to give me the most value, and I held on to those, and I just had him focus on those, and that's how I kind of fixed that problem. But when you do borrow private money, you got to be extremely careful about not being over leveraged, because that will spring up on you faster than you think. So you got to stay on top of that stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like a good result, but maybe that was a little more stressful at the time than you're letting it. Won't
Yes.
let that happen again, right?
Correct. Yeah. I think for me personally, I like to do one deal a year and just do it really well. And I think just breaking away from that strategy did not work out well for me, personally. And I'd rather roll my properties into bigger and bigger properties, but there's still one property. You know what I mean? As opposed to keeping many small ones, because you're juggling more balls in the air when you do that. So for me personally, the answer was to stick to the strategy that always worked, which is roll over into a larger number of units and try to, be aware of your expectations from that property.
Yeah, that's great. Another good winner that people can latch onto, investors can latch onto and learn something from. Don't overextend yourself. So last question I'll ask you is there a practice, a habit, a pro tip that you can give the audience, something that you have found works for you that you'd like to share?
Yeah, the pro tip really is go one step deeper than where the average investor operates in. Ask a lot of questions, essentially, is what I'm saying. You got to dig deeper. You got to ask deeper questions than and don't take no, face whatever people say at face value. I've called brokers that have said, there's no 6 cap properties here. I've called brokers who said, no, you can never buy something here. And I've still been able to buy. So you don't take someone's word for it. You really have to do your own due diligence, your own research. And I've been laughed at for asking questions about apartments. So you really, when you start, sometimes you will get laughed at. Sometimes people will look at you like, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. But you got to still keep operating like and you want this goal that you're working towards. And I always look back to some people who made very public mistakes. And one of them is Elon Musk when he threw the rock onto the Cybertruck. Have you seen that one? Elon Musk is the CEO of Tesla, and essentially he released a new truck, and he claimed that the windows would not break, and he threw a giant rock at it, and it broke. After millions and billions of dollars invested in research and development, very publicly, the window broke. And he didn't flinch. He was just like, I guess it's a mistake. We'll figure it out. We'll move on. So we really have to be okay with making mistakes and asking questions. Why did that happen? And go beyond the standard narrative.
Man, that is great information. What a fantastic pro tip, Sheree. All right. Well, this is sort of the end of our conversation today. I really want to thank you for joining me in the locker room. Where can the audience find you to carry on the conversation if they want to, learn more about what you're doing or get involved with you?
Yeah, so the best way to reach me is my website. It's thesrilatagroup.com. So it's THESRILATHA group, GROUP.com. I also am on Instagram as Bay Area _multifamily. And you can feel free to reach me on either of those locations. Happy to work with you on. I do both multifamily coaching as well as I bring on investors on my own deals. So if either of those sound good to you, feel free to reach out and we can take it from there.
Awesome. Well, there you have it, folks. I truly hope that you were able to pick up multiple items from my conversation with Sheree today that you're able to, put to use in your real estate investing career. Make sure to check out the Real Estate Locker Room Show on iTunes. We're on Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all those great places. And when you're there, please hit the subscribe button. That's the currency that allows other people who are looking for knowledge when they're out listening to a podcast about real estate to find us easily. If you like what the show is all about and you want to leave us a review, we'd love that too. Again, it just helps the other folks out there like yourself who are looking for good real estate related content to listen to. The post-game show notes, for this show and all of Sheree's contact information will be available on my website. That's johncarneyonline.com/podcast. We are episode number 98. While you're there, feel free to drop your name into our newsletter sign-up form. We don't really send a whole lot out. I'm actually redoing our entire website right now, make it a little bit, make the experience a little bit better for you, and a little bit easier for me to share the content that I really want you to have. Occasionally, I say, because we all have inboxes that are bombarded by emails every day. So remember to stay focused on your goals, have fun, stay in the game. I'm your host, John Carney, and until next week, work hard, play hard, raise the bar, and thanks again for sharing your compelling story, Sheree.
Thank you for having me, John.
My pleasure.